it's me, Mike, with HPDS. In this video, I'll be going over Genesis chapter 47. That's Genesis chapter 47. So before I get started, let me go ahead and start off with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your kingdom come and may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please give us this day our daily bread and forgive us of our debt as we forgive those in debt to us. And Lord, lead us not into temptation, but instead deliver us from the evil one. Amen. So in this chapter, this is going to be Genesis 47. Let me go ahead and read through an outline here. We'll see that in Genesis 47 from verses 1 through 12, we're going to see that Israel comes into Egypt. So he's going to come into Egypt finally. And then from verses 13 to 26, we're going to see that the famine continues, and the Egyptians sell all that they have to Pharaoh for food. And then in verses 27 through 31, which is the end of the chapter, we're going to see that Israel grows old in Egypt. Verses 1 through 12, we're going to see that Israel finally inhabits Egypt in the land of Goshen. If we recall from Genesis 46, Israel made the journey out there to Egypt, and they arrive in a place called, and they set their eyes on a place called Goshen, which is in the land of Egypt, and Joseph begins to prepare them to live there, and in this chapter, Genesis 47, we'll see that they actually do make it in there to inhabit. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the chapter. Let's see. Genesis 47. Let me get it set up over here. Okay. And Genesis 47 reads, Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for their famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fail. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for the flocks. and for the cattle of the herds, and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, We will not hide it from my lord how that our money is spent. My lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. Then Joseph said unto the people, Behold, I have bought you this day, and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for your food for your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph, and said unto them, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. All right, so that's Genesis chapter 47 in its entirety. So let's see, what did we come across here in Genesis 47? Again, let's see, based off my outline, we're going to see that Israel finally comes into Egypt, where he's going to meet the Pharaoh, and he's going to be given a portion of the land out there in Goshen. And we'll see that again in verses 1 through 12. And then past that, we'll see from verses 13 to about 26, we'll see that the famine in all of the land continues, and we'll see that all the Egyptians sell all that they have to Pharaoh for food, and so this is done through Joseph's work. Joseph is the one that God gave the dream to Pharaoh and interpreted through Joseph, and we see that Joseph is the one acting as Pharaoh since that time. And then we're going to see in the rest of the chapter from verses 27 till 31, we'll see that Israel grows old in Egypt, and we'll see that basically he gets to 147 years old, I believe. It says that in verse 28, it says, And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. So he grows to be 147, not quite as old as his fathers did. Remember, Abraham was like 175, and I believe Isaac lived until 180. And here we have Jacob living to 147. And we'll see that that's that going down into that time frame where God said he wouldn't strive with us for more than 120 years. So that age is dropping and dropping and dropping, and he even acknowledges this when Pharaoh asks him. Pharaoh does ask him in this chapter, "How old are you?" And at the time, he's 130, and he tells him, "I'm 130 years old." So clearly, this is something that Pharaoh must have taken an interest in, thinking about, like, wow, this is an old guy, and he has to tell him, "Yeah, I'm 130 years old, but I'm not even as old as my fathers in their journeys and their pilgrimage." So now what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and I'll read this again line by line as I do, and we'll see what the Holy Spirit brings, and I'll get into it. So let me take a look. So Genesis 47. So yeah, we see that it starts off with Joseph. So at the end of Genesis 46, we saw that Joseph was preparing them. He was preparing them, so he was telling them what to say. He was telling them at the end of Genesis 46 that I will go up to show Pharaoh and my brethren and so forth. And let's see what he says. He says, "And it shall come to pass when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, 'What is your occupation?'" And he's telling them what he's going to tell. He was telling his father and his brothers what to say there at the end of Genesis 46. So Genesis 47 is going over that, and here comes the Pharaoh. And he tells Pharaoh, so this is like the official capacity where he's officially telling Pharaoh, even though Pharaoh had already known. He's probably in wherever Pharaoh makes his proclamations, or wherever he does things publicly and legally and so forth. And he tells them, "Look, here comes my brethren, my father, my brethren, and their flocks and all their herds and everything that they have. They came out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen." So he's saying that these people made a sojourn out here from the land of Canaan, and now they're in the land of Goshen, which is Egypt. And he takes some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. So I'm not entirely sure what this means, but it sounds like he took, like, some of the best guys out there, and brought some of the, even 5 men. So he brought 5 of his brothers, um, and brings them, and of course Pharaoh, just like Joseph said he would, he asked them, "What is your occupation?" And they told him, "We're shepherds, both we and also our fathers." So we were all shepherds. And so they just said, they said, "Moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come. So for thy servants have no pasture in their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen." So they're making it kind of clear that this is kind of the reason why they're out here in reality. So never mind the whole situation with Joseph in them. The truth of the matter is that there's a huge famine going on, and they have a bunch of flocks, and there's nowhere really to feed them, to pasture them, because of how bad the famine is. And so they're making, a plea to the Pharaoh to let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And so Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, "Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land, make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen, let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle." So officially, this is Pharaoh saying, "Look, uh, this is your father and your brothers. These are your father. This is your father and your brothers." He's saying, "This is your father and your brothers." And what can I tell you? The land of Egypt is all of yours. That's what he's telling them. He's saying, you're in the highest position possible, and go ahead and take them and make them dwell in the land of Goshen. Let them dwell there. And moreover, and on top of that, he's extending job offers to any of them. He's saying, and if any of them are good at what they do, then make them rulers over my cattle. If that's what they do, their cattle, go ahead and make them rulers over my cattle. And so then Joseph brought Jacob, his father. So now he's bringing him, he's doing clearly some sort of a presentation. He's doing something, publicly and legally. Like I said, he's at some sort of, uh, you know, auditorium or some sort of uh, court or something like that. And he's presenting after he made that presentation and he was given the okay officially. Here he brings on his father, Jacob, and he brings him before Pharaoh. And we can see that Jacob blesses the Pharaoh. So Jacob, and we're going to see quite a bit of history between these two nations in the future. In fact, God does say that he pulls his son out of, he calls his son out of Egypt, and Jesus Christ makes some, he spends the early part of his life in Egypt, and we're told about that later on in the New Testament. So, but we're also going to see in the next book of Exodus what happens between these two nations, how they have a pretty bad falling out. Pharaoh and them have a pretty bad falling out, but here is Jacob is blessing the Pharaoh. And so this is when they're really first. We saw what happened with Abraham with the Pharaoh. Pharaoh tried to take his wife and then realized his whole house was cursed because he was trying to take Abraham's wife, Sarah. And so now we're seeing here where Jacob is actually just blessing the Pharaoh. And so this is not the first time these two family lines have met, clearly. This is another time that they've come and spent some time there with him. And so it says, and Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? And so this is, like I said, Pharaoh was clearly somehow interested in his age. He's looking at Jacob, and it just goes to show how long people were already dying pretty young. Like I said, so it wasn't something that I had made mention in some of the earlier chapters of Genesis 37 how during the life of Abraham, more than likely Seth was still alive. So his great grandfather or whatever would have still been alive even as Abraham was dying. And so it's one of those things that at that time people were already dying pretty young, it seems, because it says that Abraham died in a good old age, or who was it? Was it you're gonna go and you're gonna die in a good old age? And I think that was said of Abraham. And he died at 175 years old, and he wasn't even as old as, it turns out Shem, perhaps it looks like Shem may have outlived him, and Shem was on the ark with Noah, mind you. But nonetheless, other people in the world were still dying very young. And even here in Egypt, it seems that the people were not living even as long as Joseph. As long as Jacob. And Jacob was only 130 years old. So you can see that people were living and dying much, much faster. Or at least people not, within the line of Abraham that was blessed over here. But nonetheless, Pharaoh seems interested in the age of Jacob, and Jacob's telling him 130 years old, and he's also saying, but on top of that, I'm not even as old as, my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. He's telling them the days of the day. He says, few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So he's telling them he's already telling them, look, I'm 130 years old, but my life has been hard and evil and rough. And I didn't get to even live as long as my fathers have in their pilgrimage. So Pharaoh's interested in his age, and this man is telling him, I'm not even as old as I should be or as old as my fathers were. So it's it's a strange interaction there that Pharaoh's clearly interested in his age. And we're seeing that Jacob here is one of the last guys. He's going to be one of the last men to live to kind of these long ages. We'll see that the ages of even Jacob don't seem to live as long, and Moses is the only one that lives to be that age 120 from now on until the end of the Bible, I'm pretty sure. But But here, the people are dying by Genesis 47. It's the first book of the Bible, mind you. Getting to the end of the book, but it still is just the first book of the Bible. And we've seen all kinds of things. We saw the order of creation and how the sun actually came after the plants, um, and after the earth. And we saw that the rainbow came around and quite possibly changed all the physics. We're seeing that the line of Cain quite possibly may not have been in the human flesh that we understand it, but may have been some sort of other kind of life form that God also calls a man. Uh, but um, and here we're seeing that the people no longer live to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 900 years old anymore. That the here's Israel. Israel dies at 147 years old, and we'll see from then on. We'll keep in our mind how old are people living from now on. So we'll see that we went from 175 to 180, now down to 147. So but let me keep going. So that's his age, and he tells them about that. And so Jacob blessed Pharaoh. So Jacob blesses the Pharaoh, and then he leaves. So that's the end of that little meeting. And then so of course after that whole ordeal takes place, Joseph takes his father and his brothers, and he gives them possession in the so he's officially given them. So technically Israel owns land out there in Egypt. They have possession of the land of Goshen. So that's what's going on here. They have legal authority in that land. They're sojourning, but it belongs to them uh, by 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 right of Joseph. And so it says Joseph nourished his father and his brothers and all his father's household with the bread according to their families. And that's like I said, that's verses 1 through 12, where Israel actually makes it officially into the land of Egypt, and they're given their portion there. From Genesis, from verses 13 through 26, what we're gonna see is that we're gonna see it's gonna kind of go away from all that story, and it's gonna go back to the pressing matter of the famine, and how the famine is a pressing matter in all of Egypt. And remember, Joseph is in charge here, and Joseph, we're gonna see he's gonna be making a killing. He's really gonna be very successful in this time of the famine, and he's gonna save all these people. But at the same time, he's gonna, like I said, he's gonna be making a killing business wise. I mean, all of Pharaoh takes everything. Pharaoh at the end of this famine owns everything. It owns the land. It owns the people, and on top of that, it begins to charge a tax of 20% over all the people, and it's all thanks to Joseph, which, once again, all thanks to God, and this is God's plan. This is God showing His plan to these people, the Egyptians, and He's showing themselves. Look, this is the man that saved all of Egypt by means of divination of a dream given to him by, interpreted by God Himself. This very same man finds his long lost fathers and brothers in some sort of impossible situation that is done only by God, and it comes to pass that these people are learning to respect him. God is showing His power through this, through Joseph, and He's just straight up showing him how he runs things, and he's efficient, and he takes over, and he's acting like God over here. And so that's why we know historically afterwards we're going to see that Egyptians have a problem with worshiping themselves as gods. But here they're seeing, they're actually seeing God work through Joseph, and that's what it was. Look at all the miracles. He was a miracle in himself, how he survived, and how he interpreted the dream of the Pharaoh, and how he came into power. That was all miracles. And then how he saved the land of Egypt, or how he came across his father and his brothers again. These were all miraculous things that just didn't happen to anybody. And they happened to Joseph because God chose him to let it happen to. And all of Egypt in those days were basically all of Egypt was witness to this. They were all paying attention. They all heard about what had happened. He was famous among them, and his story was famous among them. And we see that Egypt got to witness this in the early stages of Israel's history. Um, but like I said, he's going to make a killing here starting in starting in verse 13, because the famine was very sore, that the land of Egypt and all of the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And so, and it says that Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So he bought the money into Pharaoh's house. So he gets all the money. And so when the money of the land failed in Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, "Look, give us bread, for why should we die in your presence?" Because the money's failed. So they ran out of money. Basically, they they spent all of their money to buy this, and basically at this point, Pharaoh and Joseph had all the money in Egypt. So here they are with all the money, and they're saying, you still got to give us bread, because you have all the money. How are we gonna buy? Why should we die because we don't have money? And Joseph tells them, you know what? Go ahead and give me your cattle. If the money fails, give me your cattle, and I'll sell to you for cattle. And so, of course, that's what they do. They go ahead and they bring all their cattle now, and in exchange, he gave them bread, and for their horses and for their flocks and for the cattle and for the asses, and he fed them all for their cattle for that year. So you see that he. So this is about what we second years when the brothers and Israel make it back. So it goes on. So it stands to reason they're still in that second year right here where the money is failing. And then it says, let's see. So then to that year when the money failed, that second year, they had to exchange all their horses and all their cattle and all their flocks and everything. And so that was that second year, and they had to get rid of all their animals. And then it says, when that year was ended, they came unto him the second year and said unto him, so this would be the second year. So this is either that second year when the brothers make it, or it's that second year from that year when the money actually failed, which would make it about the third year, or quite possibly even the fourth year, because the money could have failed in the third year, uh, and this could have been the second year after the money failed, which would have made it the fourth year. And you could see that we will not hide it from my Lord how that our money is spent, and that you also have our herds of cattle, and there is not aught left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. So this is quite possibly either the second, third, or the fourth year. Um, and the money has failed. They've sold all their cattle, and there's basically nothing left but their land and their bodies. And so that's why they say, wherefore should we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed. So they're making some pretty desperate moves here, the people of Egypt. The people of Egypt have sold themselves into bondage. So at this point, like I said, this famine is so severe. God Himself said the 7 years would be so bad, the famine, that the 7 years of plenty would be forgotten. So these people are definitely forgetting those 7 years of plenty, because in those 7 years, all those people must have been living pretty well, pretty successful, and now they're struggling so bad that they've sold themselves into bondage to the Pharaoh by means of Joseph. So this is all Joseph's planning. This is all Joseph's business acumen. This is Joseph doing all this because God placed him there. And that's what they do. They go ahead, and that's what it says. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. And for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them. So they sell all the land, And look what he does. He actually starts moving people around. So he actually starts doing some city planning over here, and he moves all the people and he removed them to the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. So he put all the people into cities because basically all the fields and all the land was owned by Pharaoh. And so he would have, at this point, he would have removed the people, put them in the cities, made them live in the cities. He would have fed them in the cities, and he would have started working them from the cities. He would have probably moved the people where he needed them to go to farm wherever it was and to take care of whatever it was that he was going to take care of them. But at this point, he's got them all in the cities, and we're seeing that these people in the cities are basically servants. So it comes to, comes to reason that cities are meant for like these kings, and it's for their people, for, and that's what it's kind of going on. And so let's see. So he moves them all to the cities. The only people he doesn't move, it says, are the priests. And this is also, once again, this is also part of Joseph's thinking and his mindset and his business acumen. Because first off, he didn't buy the land off the priests because they already had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh was already giving them stuff, and he already gave them food. Basically, the Pharaoh and the priesthoods were part of the same family because if you remember, Joseph is acting as Pharaoh, and who was he given as a wife? None other than the daughter of a priest. So the priest is, and the Pharaoh basically have their they're in the same bed over here. It's the same people almost. They're family. They're related or something. They're related if only by marriage. We see at least one marriage there where somebody from the office of the pharaoh is married to somebody from the office of the priests. So here he is. He's not taxing himself. Basically, they're not buying. They didn't buy. The priests got to live just like nothing had happened, and they were everything was paid for them, so they didn't have to sell themselves. They didn't have to sell their land like the Egyptians did. Just the priests got to keep theirs, and guess what? Joseph was married to a daughter of a priest. So like I said, Joseph's making a killing over here. He's business wise, he's making a killing. He owns everything. And look, he tells them too. He goes, Joseph said to the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Here, and he goes, lo, here is the seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. So that's what he's telling them. He's telling them that's why he moved them into the cities. He's all, look, people, they're in the city. I bought you, you're my servants. Well, I bought you and your land. You're all servants, and all the land belongs to Pharaoh. And now go ahead, here's some seed, and you're gonna work the land still. You're still gonna work the land, but now you're gonna do it for Pharaoh. Now you work for Pharaoh, everybody. And he's saying, and basically, because you work for Pharaoh, you're gonna pay a fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own for seed of the field and for your food, and for them of your household, and for food for your little ones. So he's still being pretty gracious. He's only charging them 20% tax, which is, if you think about it, it's actually like a double portion. So I feel like that's kind of why there's a big deal. Why it was always kind of made that when he gave, for example, when he fed his brothers, Joseph fed Benjamin 5 times more than everybody else. And remember when he gave them all a pair of clothes, he gave them all a pair of clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 5 pairs of clothing and a bunch of money, 300 pieces of silver or whatever. So that's kind of why God was showing him this portion thing, because when you think about it, here is Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's taking a fifth part, which is 20%. Whereas when Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and them, when they made their tithes, their concept was a tenth. They were giving a tenth to God. So God only took a tenth. This Pharaoh here is taking a fifth, which is a double portion compared to God. So you can see that Pharaoh is over here owning everything, and he takes a fifth. He's taking a double portion for himself, and it comes through Joseph, mind you, Joseph and Pharaoh. But that's just somewhat I see here that's what could be going on here. But he goes ahead and he takes them, and they take 20%, and it's all going to be a tax, and you can keep the rest. But and they said, but the people cry. They said to him, "You've saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be." And they agree. It's a good thing. You're not being too harsh on us. And so that's what happens. And Joseph made it a law over that land. So it was a law that basically stayed in place forever after that. That Pharaoh should have the fifth part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh. So basically, all the people of Egypt, except for the priests, uh, all have to pay a fifth to Pharaoh. So that's what it was all because of once again all because of Joseph and so forth. And so, but then it goes on to that's 26. So that's pretty much the end of that. Like is Joseph is the famine is still continuing, and by the second, third, or fourth year, which either way, it's just about halfway through. By that point, people have to sell everything. They've sold in everything, and they still have quite a while to go on this into this famine. But just those few years of famine basically secured the wealth for Pharaoh in Egypt for a very long time, a very long time. I mean, by the time this was written, this would have been written 400, over 400 years later, just about, and it was still kept in place. So it was 7 years of famine basically kept Pharaoh's house paid and secured for the next over four next 400 years until Pharaoh basically uh, goes through the Exodus, and God deals with him in the Exodus. But continued on in verses 27 to 31, we're going to transition back into Israel's age and how long he lives and so forth. So we see that Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. So remember, he was 130 when he stood in front of Pharaoh and told him his age. Now he's 147 years old. And so now he's pretty obvious that he's gotten so old that he's about to die. And so when he's dying, he calls his son Joseph, and he says things to him, and he tells him basically, make an oath to me, make a promise, doing that whole put thy hand under my thigh, just like Abraham. Was it Abraham? No, it was Isaac. No, it was Abraham that told that to his his main servant when he sent him to Haran to find Isaac a wife. And that's kind of that same put thy hand under my thigh. So he's telling him to make an oath, and he says basically, he says, don't bury me in Egypt, is what he's asking Joseph. Don't bury me in Egypt. He goes, you need to go bury me with my fathers. Take me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. Go bury me out there where all my forefathers are buried. And Joseph tells him, I will do as thou hast said. So Joseph is over here, and he tells him, I'll do that. And so you hear Jacob, it's a big thing for Jacob, swear unto me. And he swore unto him. So Joseph swore unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. So basically, at the end of his life, Jacob over here is getting so old, he knows he's dying. And, one of his last wishes, he's telling him, promise me that you won't bury me in Egypt. Promise me instead that you'll take me back to Canaan, to the burying place, and bury me there in our ancestral in our ancestral burying place. And so that's what Jacob says. Jacob tells Joseph, and Joseph agrees, and they make their little solemn promises. They swear to each other, And that's the end of chapter 47. So we'll have to read into the rest of the next chapter to see what happens further. But that is Genesis 47 in its entirety. Um, and yeah, one more time just to go over, what did we see? Like I said, we saw Israel coming into Egypt officially to receive a portion in the land of Goshen. And he stood there before Pharaoh officially, and Pharaoh asked him questions. And this would have been in like Pharaoh's court. And he asked him, one of the big questions was, "How old are you?" It was a big deal for him. And as it goes on, it's a big deal that he still makes 147 years old. That Joseph lives that long. That I mean, not Joseph, but Jacob lives that long, which is Israel. Israel makes it to 147 years old. Pharaoh's, even the Pharaoh is, wow, that's an old man over there. He's intrigued. But we also see that that whole time that the famine is going on, God used Joseph to really increase the house of Pharaoh. Pharaoh's house just, I mean, it just increased. He became Egypt. Pharaoh became Egypt. Everything was sold to him. He owned everything. Everything in Egypt belonged to Pharaoh, and it was all thanks to God. Uh, God making his blessing upon Abraham and fulfilling his blessings, and Egypt got to be a part of that too. So Egypt was being favored, or they were being blessed because Jacob had blessed them. So Jacob did bless Pharaoh in that time, and then we read the story of how everybody in Egypt has to sell everything they have during the famine just to stay eating, just to stay alive. They sell everything. They sell themselves into servitude. They sell their land over to Pharaoh. And what happens? They have to basically go back and work the land, but now they're working it entirely for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh takes 20% taxes. So, but that is the book. That is chapter 47. And I'll go ahead and end this video here, and I'll go ahead and remind you, if you're watching this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel um, for future chapter by chapter Bible studies. And God bless you, and I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.